Evening, gentlemen. How's it going?
Doing well.
Hi.
So today we're going to be looking at a co-op shooter called Rip Out. This is another game that is in early access, and I actually did play it with a friend of ours, Sean.
Oh, very nice.
So the premise of the game is fairly similar to what we've seen with, say, Vermintide and games of that sort. Maybe even a little bit like a Warframe. But it's done in a survival horror type aesthetic. You do have kind of like a base of operations where you can get mods for your gear and your weapons. You can look at different upgrades, and you can pick your missions that you go into, and then you load into the mission, and it is an isolated, singular objective, whether it's to free a crew, destroy a certain enemy, whatever the case may be, and then when the mission is done, you get your spoils, you get your typical loadout, or not loadout, but results screen.
Yeah.
And you go back to your base in order to pick another.
That does remind me a little bit of Warframe with the whole mission-based stuff, because at least when I played Warframe, that's how it was. Okay, cool.
So the thing about it is, it's very basic in that your weapon can be modded down the road, but we didn't really get super far into that. But there's also these little creatures in the levels that you can scan and interact with, and it will pull them into you to use as either an alternate shot or a upgraded melee weapon, and they have a certain amount of charges or energy that you can use before they are depleted. Some are even just you pick it up and it gives you a shield, so additional damage reduction.
Okay.
One problem that I definitely ran into with this, and it could have just been my poor playing, is that could also be intentional. Like a survival horror, I ran out of ammo every mission we did.
They rely heavily on the melee then.
Yeah, it kind of definitely has an old school shooter feel to it. So I can understand them being not very generous with the ammo, because that was a very common thing with older stuff.
That robot, if you walk by it without crouching, will just swing at you. It's just a stationary objective on the side that will obstacle that will just swing and do damage to you. When I did speak to Sean about the game, he very much enjoyed the aesthetic more than maybe anything else.
Yeah, it's got a fairly, I'm not going to say totally unique aesthetic, but it's definitely a little bit different. Even just looking how you were reloading the guns, and it's got almost like those arms that are moving around and stuff like that. That's very different than some other weapons you see in other games.
I did think that the UI was a little bit lacking. Even just something like the font is as basic as it gets. But that can always be updated, improved on, if the core gameplay is there. And it is. The gunplay is harder to see in a video, especially because I'm not great at first-person shooters. It is very solid. Right. So any of these little things, even just the look of the damage numbers, they're not great. So here's another example of what I was saying. You can scan a creature, you suck it in, and now I have the additional bar there with my Q key where I can, this will be like a photon blast, a one thing, which those are really nice to utilize if you run out of ammo.
Yeah. Because
there are ammo pickups, but they're fairly sparse. And this is one element that I know is a topic of a little bit of contention with games like this. It's shared resources and loot. So when you come across a stash that has some crafting materials, which are obviously valuable because they're the only thing that you can get to use for mod upgrades at your station in between, and ammo, you have to coordinate who picks up what, because they don't give you a lot, and it's not individually instanced for you.
I guess it adds a level of kind of almost realism to it, right? Because, if you were in a real situation, not that you ever would be in space fighting monsters, but you would have to split ammo and things like that. So maybe that's good for the survival horror aspect of it.
The entire game is giving me a feel of sort of a PS2 era shooter, and a lot of those also, you've shared you shared all the things that dropped. They would also often have friendly fire. Does this game have friendly fire?
Yes.
Yeah. See, I'm not too surprised. This definitely has that feel in almost every. It almost feels like a early 2000s Dead Space.
Now, interestingly enough, we never actually did damage to one another, so I'm not 100% sure how the friendly fire works. I just know that there was one mission where we completed the mission, we got into the shuttle at the end, and before the shuttle took off, Sean Malayed me to death. Now, I don't think he was intending to, because he was testing out some key bindings, and then came out of the menu and I was just dead.
Nice.
So there's something there, but I can't speak to it, unfortunately, myself.
Yeah.
I did do some solo missions where I wanted to test out the controller support, because I did play this with keyboard and mouse when I was playing with him, and then I decided to give it a shot using an Xbox controller, and honestly, the native controller support is perfect as well.
One question I guess I have is that comparison between multiplayer and single player. A game like this, me just going off of what I'm seeing, I think it would be a lot of fun to play multiplayer, but single player might not be as interesting.
I had an okay time with it. It definitely would have gotten more repetitive if I put more time into it, because things like story elements, there's some narration when you're in the levels, there's a little bit of dialogue with your objectives, but we didn't really, at least for what we came across, see any sort of big narrative or anything like that. And to be honest, these types of co-op shooter games don't always have that.
It doesn't need much. I mean, aliens on a ship, you fight the aliens. That's all you need.
Definitely has a bit of a slower pace than a lot of co-op shooters as well, so that's kind of interesting.
Well, and that's all contributing to the survival horror element of it, because there are even times where you'll be walking down a hall and a grate will open on the ceiling in front of you and nothing comes out.
Playing tricks on you.
But they play tricks on you.
Yeah.
And you can't tell here, but the sound is fantastic for building that atmosphere.
Yeah, it definitely seems suspenseful. Does it have points then where just a flood of enemies comes at you, maybe at the end of a level or something?
I don't know if I would call it a flood, just because ammo is scarce and combat is a little bit more... it's not a twitch shooter. There aren't a lot of quick little enemies, but you'll get rooms where, say, there's maybe 3 or 4 in a row, because it does stick to kind of that meticulous pace, but they do give you a little bit more of, say, an endurance battle, so to speak, that you have to kind of get through. And there were a couple of times where we got near the end of a mission, and this is actually one of the complaints of mine. Killing enemies is seemingly pointless in the early access, because they don't drop anything and they don't give any experience.
So you just beeline to objectives and you're good.
Which is what we had to do a couple of times, because we got near the end of the level and we ran out of ammo and there was no way we were getting through it, so it's just run for the shuttle. And honestly, I hope that's something that they do change in the the full release. Even if not some, because there's not going to be an experience, and say enemies giving health or ammo might be a little bit too generous for the survival element they're going for. But if they had a rare chance to drop, say, even a crafting material, because those aren't super frequent, but at least then you'd have something that you were gunning for when you're killing enemies. In this case, it's almost as if you just fight them to clear a path to your objective. And that's pretty common for a survival horror game, though, is sometimes you gotta determine between fight or flight.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're playing with co-op, you can resurrect a partner, or you do get 1 revive token a mission.
That definitely makes the co-op a lot better, having a revive option.
And the only difference we could spot from the co-op to the single player is that the enemies in co-op had a higher health pools.
Which, I mean, I guess that makes sense.
it didn't seem like there was more of them. It just seemed like they had a higher health pool. So, kind of covered everything that I think we need to cover. I present to you guys the question every time we ask. Would you continue after the first opinion?
I'd probably play it co-op if someone else wanted to play it co-op. I definitely wouldn't play this game solo. It doesn't really look like that kind of game that would interest me that much. But, I mean, it does look like a fun enough co-op experience to play it for a while.
I'm on the same boat with that. I think if I was to know I was going to play it co-op with somebody, yeah, I'd give this a shot and continue playing. But solo, I mean, I've got a few other games that I could play, things like a Dead Space or even Callisto Protocol, so yeah.
Well, I think that's almost a given that if you're going to be playing this game, you're going to be playing it to play co-op. Mm-hmm. I did do a little bit of single player, but as I said, that was just for testing. Beyond the tutorial, which you do have kind of like a set tutorial level where later levels are a little bit more procedurally generated, there isn't much of a reason to play by yourself. It would be the kind of game that you would get together with a couple of your friends and you would play. In that mentality, I would absolutely classify this as a continue after first opinion, again, as long as it's a co-op. So I think we have a unanimous 3 continues after the first opinions, but also 3 caveats of they would have to be co-op. And guess what? That's what we have each other for. Until next time.
Hey, did you like that video? If you did, be sure to let us know by clicking the like button and leaving a comment. If you want to be first in line for any new content, be sure to subscribe to our channel and then hit up our Facebook page. The link's in the description below to see what's coming up next.